It's all right. Yeah.
You're all very, very welcome, and my name is Gerry Reynolds, a priest here in the monastery. I've been living in this house since 1983. I came here just after the hunger strike. The hunger strikes were in 1981, when 10 people died with tremendous passion for a political settlement, and those hunger strikes changed the whole pattern of the conflict here in Northern Ireland, because they made the Sinn Féin party politically acceptable. Sinn Féin began to increase their percentage of the vote in Northern Ireland after that. But the big problem was that nobody would talk to Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams was elected here for West Belfast, but nobody would talk to him because the IRA were still continuing with the violent armed struggle. And that has been the tragedy of Ireland, really, for so long. The nationalist people of Ireland, who believed that a great injustice had been done to the Irish people in the aftermath of the partition of the early 1920s. The northern state developed in a very unfair and unjust way. The nationalist Republican population of Northern Ireland were second-class citizens. They had no real share in power. The unionist population dominated the scene here. So in many ways, when you know the details of it, it's understandable, because there was non-cooperation from the nationalist people because they were aggrieved by the way the whole thing was settled. But then the two traditions in Irish nationalism, you solve the problem by constitutional means, by democratic dialogue and democratic consent, and you work for that. Was one part of the Irish tradition. The other part of the Irish tradition was you get nothing from the British government, from England, unless you take up arms against the British presidency here. So that meant that Irish nationalism was divided. It was divided by the people who believed in a constitutional, democratic way forward, the people who believed that the only thing that the British government understood was armed struggle. And the contribution of the monastery here to the resolution of our problem and helping us in the path of peace was to create the facility for the two representatives of Irish nationalism, Gerry Adams and John Hume. John Hume being the constitutional, democratic dialogue man, Gerry Adams being the representative of the violent struggle, but now with political mandate after the hunger strike, was to bring them together here and to get them to agree on a democratic way forward. And Father Reid, who was the priest who was most involved in that, I was really on the sidelines of it. He was in the monastery here for about 40 years. He's now retired in Dublin. It was he brought Gerry Adams and John Hume together, first here in the monastery in what we call Parlour 4, just in the corridor there as you come down, and then meeting in John Hume's house in Derry from time to time as well. And Father Reid kept a link with the Dublin government, first of all with Charlie Haughey as the Irish Prime Minister, and then with Albert Reynolds. But John Hume also kept a link, had his own link with Charlie Haughey and Albert Reynolds. But in that circle of John Hume, Gerry Adams, Father Reid, and the Dublin Taoiseach, Charlie Haughey at one time, and after him then Albert Reynolds, the peace process developed. And it developed in bringing to completion what we call the Downing Street Declaration. The Downing Street Declaration was a declaration by John Major, the British Prime Minister, and Albert Reynolds, the Prime Minister in Dublin, about the way forward to resolve the Irish conflict. And in that declaration, the British side said that they had no strategic political interest in remaining in Ireland, that the destiny and future of Ireland depended on the people of Ireland, and it was for the people of Ireland to work out their destiny in a democratic, peaceful way. So when that declaration was published then, in the middle of December in 1993, Sinn Féin were somewhat disappointed with it. It didn't really spell it out in the way they thought that it would be spelled out, but they were prepared to work with it. And they worked with the Downing Street Declaration from the middle of December 1993 until the end of August 1994, when they had brought it to a point where they could get the support of the vast majority of the Republican constituency to accept the democratic, dialogical way forward to make peace. And so the IRA declared a ceasefire at the end of August 1994, and then the Loyalists declared a ceasefire in the middle of October 1994. And prior to that, the Republican position was Brits out. You know what that means? Brits out. The British out of Ireland. They had no right to be here. The British Army ought not to be stalking the streets of West Belfast or anywhere really in the part of Northern Ireland. But the Republican position changed then with the ceasefire in the end of August 1994. Their position now was talks now. And they couldn't understand why the talks were slow in coming. But you can understand it yourself. If you've had a violent conflict with somebody and they tell you at a particular time, it's all over now, let's talk, you'd be so emotionally bruised and hurt that you wouldn't easily move into dialogue. And that's really what happened then with the breakdown of the ceasefire in the beginning of February 1996. The ceasefire broke down. The Canary Wharf was bombed in London. Manchester was bombed, and we were back in the situation we were in. The war was going on, and then Tony Blair came to power in 1997, and very shortly after Tony Blair came into power, the ceasefire was, IRA's ceasefire was back in position, and the conversations then began that led up to the Anglo-Irish Agreement in April, Good Friday 1998. So the agreement then created a framework in which all sections of the community could work together to make a settlement on the basis of power sharing. And there was one hitch, that was that the Democratic Unionist Party Gerry Adams' party never played any part in the lead up to the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1998. And they kept sniping at the official unionists who were part of the agreement until it broke down. The efforts at setting up a power sharing situation in Stormont broke down a number of times. And finally, we had a new election, and in the new election, the major parties turned out to be Ian Paisley's party and Gerry Adams' party. The moderate Unionist Party, the moderate Nationalist Party were pretty well wiped out in the elections. And it was up to the two extremes then to endeavour to get the peace process moving again. And they achieved that in 2007, in May 2007. But that's roughly where we are. Our little part in it, in the monastery here, was facilitating dialogue between the two sides of Irish nationalism at a time when nobody would talk to the armed struggle form of Irish nationalism. We were able to provide a sanctuary place here in the monastery where John Hume and Gerry Adams could come together. John Hume would come in the front door and Gerry Adams would come in the back door, and they would meet in one of the rooms upstairs, and they were able to carry forward their conversation with the Prime Minister in Dublin. Not that he didn't meet them face to face. He did assign Martin Mansard to be part of the conversation. Martin Mansard was a civil servant then. He was afterwards a member of Parliament down south. He's just lost his seat in Tipperary there yesterday, and he's out of a job now, at least out of a political job. But that's a general overview of the whole situation. If you want to ask me questions about it and about the role of the Catholic Church in the whole situation, I'm open to any questions. Not that I may be, I think I'll answer most of them. I should be able to answer most of them, put it like that.
And I would like for you to articulate the Catholic Church's stance against the violent struggle, throughout.
Yes.
And in a struggle, a nationalist struggle that many defined as being in the name of Catholicism, how did you bridge the gap to try to reach out to people and make them recognize what the Catholic Church's official stance on violence was?
The Catholic Church's official stand in the whole struggle was against the violence, that the violence would make things worse. And that was repeated again and again by the combined church leadership, Methodist, Church of Ireland, Presbyterian and Catholic. And Bishop Cathal Daly was the bishop here in Belfast, in this part of Ireland, and he again and again and again reiterated the fact that violence is not going to resolve this problem. That was the theory of it, and the theory of it was absolutely right. But if you just stay with the theory of it, you have to engage with the people who are not taking up that theory. And that again was the role of the monastery. While we accepted totally the theory, the vision that Bishop Cathal Daly was presenting, you had to make contact with the people who were committed to violence. Because in the end of the day, there's something in the human being who doesn't want to be violent. The human being wants to live in peace, wants to live in right relationship, wants to give the other person and the other party their dignity and freedom, and expecting the same from themselves, that they giving to one another the non-negotiables. That is, to treat me according to my dignity and rights, and I treat you according to your dignity and rights, and we'll commit together to a dialogue that will resolve the problem. But the Catholic Church was always strongly against the violence, but the Catholic Church also had pastorally to engage with the men who were leading the violent campaign. And that really was what happened from the monastery here. And in a way we're ideally suited because we're very close to the people and we're not exactly involved in the parish structure of the Catholic diocese here. We have a certain independence of the diocesan parish structure. The lady behind you wanted to say something.
Yes, you described sort of the church here's role in terms of bridging the political divide, but can you describe the church's role in bridging the social divide, both during the Troubles and then continuing in terms until today, in terms of people's how they remember the conflict? How has the church played any role at the sort of lower level or the societal level?
Again, you know, articulating the principles of justice and fairness and you know, fair distribution of the jobs available. You know, the church had quite a role in endeavouring to get a fair employment policy accepted, in having a fair allocation of public housing policy accepted, and then obviously the church had a big contribution as well in education and in having the Catholic education accepted as equal, you know, equally entitled to endowment and support by state funds as the state system of education. So it's an ongoing thing. I mean, the education is a big issue now, and how it will be organized in the future. And the Catholic Church's position is that education has to be, the benefits have to be fairly distributed, and everybody has to have the possibility of being educated according to their talent and you know, their role in society.
Well, actually, I was going to ask the question just about education as well. We had someone the other day who suggested that the Catholic Church has expressed kind of some reservations about integrating schools, and I'm curious, is that true? And if so, what's the particular reasoning behind that? Because it seems that having the younger communities interact would potentially be beneficial to the process. Yeah.
The integrated schools did not have the support of the leadership of the Catholic Church at the beginning. The leadership is much more open now to the role of integrated schools, and would be wanting, you know, Catholic schools to be open to everybody. But the societal divide here is so deep, you know, that again can be fine in theory, but it's difficult to work it out in practice. And unless you, I mean, kind of busing people as they did long ago in Boston from one part of the city to another wouldn't solve the problem of segregated education here. Segregated education is related to the way the communities are structured and the way they came to be structured as a result of the conflict. The conflict divided the people very, very deeply. You know, there isn't a Catholic living at the other side of that wall. You came along by the wall, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's scarcely a Protestant living at this side of the wall. You know, so how to shape an education system that meets that kind of demographic layout of people or structure of people, you know, it's difficult. But there is much more. There's much more openness. Like I know that Bishop Noel Traynor, who is the present bishop of Downeyconnor, he recently visited Lagan College, you know, and was there for a day with the teachers and students. I mean, that's a big acknowledgement of the contribution of the integrated school system to the to the resolution of Northern Ireland's problems. But big things have happened in the schools, and one of them is the change of the curriculum. State schools never studied anything of Irish history in time past. They studied British history, but not the history of Ireland, not the history of the relationship of Britain and Ireland. Because had they studied the history of the relationship of Britain and Ireland, it would come to be a critique of the unionist hegemony, in this part of Ireland. But now, the curriculum is different. The curriculum is an open curriculum with the history of Ireland in all the schools. And that's a mighty change. And that's looking to the future, where we are being shaped to have a shared future for a community that was for so long in a very, very violent conflict, one side with the other.
So you mentioned the demographic distribution, Protestant, Catholic, and you talked about the future. So what action, like the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church, are taking now or for the future to get there? I mean, to bring like those communities together.
Yeah. Many small steps. Many small steps. That's one side of it. But there is a growing respect for one another as churches. I mean, and there's a lot of grassroots contact between local congregations of the church. This morning, a group from here, or two groups from here, were at the morning service of two Methodist churches. One of them in Sandy Row, which would be traditionally a very, very unionist community. There wouldn't be a Catholic living in Sandy Row. And the other was another nearby Methodist church, two Methodist churches in Glengall Street. The group from here were with them in a spirit of friendship and shared faith, worshipping with them, asking nothing, only the privilege of being with them. That we may grow together into a sense that we belong together as Christian people. We belong really to one another. But that same sense, I think, has to grow between people of different monotheistic faiths as well. All of us who believe in God believe in the God of peace and the God of right relationships between people. God doesn't want human beings to be fighting. God wants us to grow to the full potential of our talents as human beings, and to grow in respect and in right relationship with one another, in justice and peace, and in compassion for one another, carrying the burden of life together, helping one another. So that's the design of God for humanity. So there is a possibility of a tremendous energy for peace to come from the monotheistic faiths, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, working together for peace, working together for justice. I know there are places in the world where there are tremendous conflicts, but once you think of God's purpose and God's plan, that gives you hope, and you can go nowhere without hope. When I came to live here in 1983, people would say to me, just ordinary people, they'll always be fighting here, they'll always be fighting here. It was always so, they were always fighting. But I could never accept that, because it's not what we were created for. We were created to live in right relationships and in justice and in peace with one another. And you look and find what contribution you can make to God's reconciling will for all humankind.
Is there any worry? I mean, there have been a lot of problems, obviously, with the diocese in the Republic right now, sort of, because of scandals in the church and sort of lessening church membership. Has that sort of been affecting the community around here? Because is it seen in maybe fewer people sending their children to Catholic schools, or maybe diminished church attendance? Or I mean, has it been felt up here?
Yeah, there's definitely diminished church attendance, and there's been a great, how would I say, alienation from the church by the Republican movement. Many, many people in the Republican movement, prisoners of the Republican point of view, their families, their children, they feel alienated from the church because the church again and again said, you know, what they were doing was wrong, what they were doing was going nowhere. So that alienation from the church among young Republicans is part of the reality of Northern Ireland. But then it's not the whole reality. You know, there are quite significant gatherings, parish gatherings of Catholics and of Presbyterians and Methodists in Northern Ireland still. But there has been the kind of secular mind that says, you know, you can live without relationship with God. You know, that's strong too here. That is a strong base in our community. I can't give percentages, you know, but it is there.
What do your parishioners want? What do they hope for in the next 10 years, 20 years?
I suppose they just want to be able to live in peace, hopefully to contribute to a shared future for all the people of Northern Ireland. But they want their own tradition, you know, to be acknowledged. Just on the way here, there's a memorial. I don't know if you saw it, the Clonard Martyrs Memorial. Did they push the people showed you that? You know, that remembers so many people who died in the struggle. So many young men, young women too, but mostly young men. And they will want those young men to be remembered with respect and honour. And on the other side of the wall, the Unionist people will want the same for the members of their community who died in the Troubles. So I often say that when the two memorial places, become holy ground for all the people, we'll have got there. You know, when we will be able to look back on our conflict, you know, and say, yes, that's the way we were then. We don't pass judgment on them. We honour their passion and their commitment to justice, because that's what led them into the conflict, a commitment to justice. We mourn the fact that so many were killed, and we commit ourselves to work against any kind of return to violence, because there's no future in returning to violence. Violence destroys human values. It destroys justice. You know, it destroys respect for one another. So,
what is the level of commitments and participation of the community in the church activities and rituals?
Well, if you were here today, this morning, you know, there are quite big congregations in that church 3 times today. 9:30, 11:30, 9:30, 11:30 and 12:30. But there'd be lots of people who wouldn't come to church each week. A number of them who might come once a month, a number of them who would come then a few times in the year. But the church and the Christian community and the worshipping community are very important parts of the Northern Ireland social reality. You know, and for us who want to try to reach out to people on the Unionist side, their gatherings for worship are very, very important.